She was dragged out of class in handcuffs for raising her hand. The teacher called it a threat. The school called it procedure. But the video leaked, and what it showed shattered the internet. Everyone saw the truth, except the people who mattered. And then her father pulled up in a black SUV with something no one expected. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The morning sun had barely risen over the manicured lawns of Halcyon Preparatory Academy, its rays glinting off the pristine glass walls and limestone columns of the main academic building. Students in polished loafers and designer backpacks buzzed through the courtyard, their laughter echoing like wind chimes in a place that had never known discomfort. It was the kind of school that boasted Ivy League acceptances like trophies, a place where legacies lived and names meant more than numbers. And Amira Johnson was stepping into that world for the first time. Her sneakers squeaked faintly against the polished tile as she walked down the east corridor, the only one without a welcome banner or a student ambassador posted outside a door. The silence wrapped around her, heavy and intentional. Lockers were already being claimed with monogrammed magnets and photo collages. Students moved in packs. They glanced at her, then looked away. 16 years old, smart as hell, and standing alone in a sea of privilege. Her father had told her that morning, "Keep your head up, you earned this." But now, surrounded by heritage blazers and subtle sneers, her confidence was already being chipped away. Class schedules were printed on embossed cardstock. She held hers like a shield. AP English, Room 2C, honors curriculum, top tier. She had tested in with a near-perfect score, something the registrar had double-checked twice, as if it were a fluke. It wasn't. When she found the room, the door was already open. Students were seated in a U-shape around a podium, notebooks out, highlighters already moving. The room smelled like lavender hand sanitizer and old money. A tall, severe-looking woman stood at the board, halfway through writing the words "Power and Voice in American Literature." "Miss Kendall." The teacher turned just as Amira stepped in. The chatter paused. The woman narrowed her eyes, adjusting her glasses. "Are you lost, sweetie?" she asked, voice tight, smile non-existent. "This is an advanced class." Amira's throat dried. She held up her schedule, trying to keep her hand from shaking. "No, ma'am. I'm enrolled. AP English, Room 2C. Ms. Kendall took the paper, scanned it, then gave a tight, dismissive nod. "Well," she said slowly, handing it back. "Let's hope you can keep up." A few students snickered. Amira scanned the room, looking for a seat. The only empty one was in the far corner, isolated. She took it quietly. The next 40 minutes passed like a silent war. Ms. Kendall never made eye contact again. When she asked for examples of narrative voice, she skipped Amira's raised hand and called on Chase Reynolds, a senior in a Navy Ralph Lauren hoodie, who smirked as he answered. When students broke into small groups to dissect a passage, no one included Amira. She ended up sitting solo, pretending to take notes while trying not to cry. By the end of the period, she'd learned 3 things. Miss Kendall was revered by faculty, feared by students, and completely uninterested in what Amira had to offer. She exited the room with her chin up, but her stomach in knots. Over the next few days, the coldness calcified into pattern. Ms. Kendall rarely addressed her directly. When Amira did speak up, the teacher responded with curt corrections, often followed by a long pause and a redirection to someone else. The implication was always clear. Her thoughts were off topic, her ideas too abstract, her presence an inconvenience. During a class discussion on The Great Gatsby, Amira offered a perspective about the racial implications of the era's social stratification. Ms. Kendall tilted her head and said, "That's an interesting take, but let's try to stick to the text." The subtext was deafening. Worse were the whispers outside of class. In the hallway. At lunch. "Is she on scholarship? I heard her dad owns a barber shop or something." Probably a diversity admit. The cruelty wasn't overt. That was the game here. Everything was subtle, polished, coded in plausible deniability. On Friday, the class was assigned a personal essay. What does voice mean to you? Amira poured herself into it. She wrote about growing up in a quiet house, after her mom passed away, how her dad taught her that speaking up was its own kind of survival, how words mattered, how silence had once felt safe, until she realized it was also a weapon. She spent hours revising it, editing, reading it aloud. When she handed it in on Monday, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe her writing would force Miss Kendall to see her. 2 days later, she stayed after class, heart racing. Essays were being returned. Miss Kendall handed hers back without a word. A single glance told Amira everything. A D-, in thick red ink, circled twice. She flipped through the pages. Barely any notes. Just one comment on the last page. Lacks original thought. Amira stared at it, numb. Her fingers trembled. She walked out without saying a word. Her essay clutched like a wound. The sun was already dipping by the time she reached her locker. The hallway was nearly empty. She opened the door, shoved her binder inside, and stopped. Something was crumpled in the corner. It was her essay.
The same one.
Tossed, balled up, jammed deep in the metal grates, like garbage. Her breath caught. The paper had been thrown away. Not just returned. Thrown away. The D was still visible on the front page. Her stomach twisted. She turned, searching the hall for a face, a voice, something that made sense. Nothing. Just the echo of her own breathing. She pulled it out, unfolded it slowly. Then she saw something she hadn't noticed before. On the back corner, scribbled in light pencil, almost invisible. Not surprised. Her chest tightened. It wasn't Miss Kendall's handwriting. It was someone else's. Another student? A message passed behind her back? A joke? Or a warning? Her hand clenched the paper. Her vision blurred. She wasn't just being ignored. She was being erased. That night, as she tried to focus on homework, her phone buzzed with a notification. A private message from an anonymous account. You should drop that class. Not your place. Amira walked through the hallways with her back straighter now. Not from confidence, but from the sheer weight of watching eyes. Every step she took felt like a performance under scrutiny. Every glance loaded with suspicion. The carved slur in her locker hadn't been removed. No one asked about it. Not a single administrator followed up on the form she'd filled out in Miss Weaver's office. She had started to realize something chilling. Silence was part of the system.
And Miss Kendall? She wasn't finished.
After the bathroom incident, Amira noticed the shift. Subtle at first. A sharpened tone. Colder silences. But it grew. It became strategic. Calculated. Miss Kendall wasn't just ignoring her anymore. She was building a case against her, brick by brick. It started with notes. Amira saw them once when she stayed behind to pick up her dropped notebook. On Miss Kendall's clipboard, Amira, defensive in tone again, refused to follow directions during peer critique. Eyes rolled when corrected. Raised voice borderline disrespectful. All lies. Twisted versions of moments where Amira had defended herself or tried to speak up. Nothing major, but carefully curated to suggest a pattern. Miss Kendall began sharing those notes with the administration. Quiet meetings, whispered warnings. She's becoming difficult to manage. She seems angry all the time. I worry she's intimidating the other students. The irony was suffocating. Amira, barely 5'5", soft-spoken, emotionally drained, was being painted as a threat. Meanwhile, the same students who snickered during her readings or muttered under their breath during group work were praised openly. Chase has such natural leadership skills. Paige always takes initiative. She'll go far. It was the kind of praise that lifted white students while subtly erasing the contributions of anyone else. The comparison was constant. Amira couldn't speak without it being called attitude. Couldn't explain herself without it being labeled aggression. She tried to keep her head down, but the trap had already been set. One Thursday afternoon in chemistry, her lab partner, a boy named Trent, who wore his varsity jacket like a second skin, turned in their project a full day early. Amira hadn't even finished editing the conclusion yet. When she asked about it, he shrugged. Didn't think it mattered. But the next day she was pulled into the science teacher's office. Mr. Donnelly was curt. Eyes averted. I'm disappointed, he said. I saw your essay on carbon bonds. It was identical to one submitted last semester. Amira's stomach dropped. Wait, what? That wasn't even my final. Trent submitted it without... He cut her off. Plagiarism is serious, Amira. It's an honor code violation. I have to report it. She tried to defend herself. No one listened. The report was filed. Strike one. That afternoon, Miss Kendall's voice rang louder than usual in English. I will not tolerate disruptions today. If you're not here to learn, you don't belong in my classroom. She looked directly at Amira as she said it. The warning came 2 days later. A formal letter sent to her school email, pending disciplinary action. One more incident, may result in temporary suspension. Her father still didn't know. She hadn't told him about the locker, or the essays, or the warning. Marcus Johnson believed in strength, discipline, standing tall. Amira didn't want to see that look in his eyes, the one that said you should have told me sooner, the one that hinted at helplessness he didn't know how to express. So she carried it alone. Until the day it all exploded. It was a Friday. Heavy rain tapped at the windows. The class was reviewing essays on power and voice. The irony made Amira feel sick. Miss Kendall was in rare form, circling the room like a shark. Some of you chose to explore personal experience. That can be valuable, when done with clarity and control. Her eyes landed on Amira. Others, however, used their platform to play the victim. The class stilled. Amira blinked. Was that directed at her? She raised her hand, cautiously. Miss Kendall, can I ask who you're referring to? Miss Kendall's lips twitched. I didn't name names, but if you feel addressed, perhaps reflect on why. A few students stifled laughs. Amira's pulse quickened. She could feel the heat rising up her neck. That's not fair, she said quietly. You're implying something about me without saying it outright. If you have feedback, I'm open to it. But this feels personal. Miss Kendall straightened. And now you're making assumptions. This is exactly what I've been documenting. The room shifted. Some students exchanged glances. What documentation? Amira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Miss Kendall sighed, walked to her desk, opened a drawer, pulled out a folder. Thick, neatly organized, with tabs. I've been keeping a log, notes on classroom behavior. Your behavior. Amira's breath stopped. Miss Kendall flipped to a page. October 2nd argued during peer review. October 9th refused to participate. October 13th raised voice and disrupted discussion. That's not what happened, Amira said, shaking her head. You're twisting everything. Miss Kendall snapped the folder shut. I think we're done here. And then, the final trigger. Paige, the same girl who had once copied her notes and taken credit, raised her hand timidly. Miss Kendall, I just wanted to say sometimes I feel uncomfortable when Amira raises her voice. Silence. Then Miss Kendall nodded solemnly. Thank you for sharing. No one should feel unsafe in my classroom. The room broke into murmurs. A quiet accusation growing into consensus. Amira stood. This is a setup. Miss Kendall stepped back. Sit down, Amira. No, you're lying about me. You're trying to push me out. Security, Miss Kendall said, picking up the phone on her desk. I need an escort to room 2C. Student is becoming combative. Time slowed. The door opened within minutes. 2 campus security officers entered. Not police, but uniformed men who looked too eager to be called. Come with us, one said. I didn't do anything, Amira whispered. Let's take this calmly, ma'am. A ripple of shock moved through the class, but no one spoke. Not even the ones who knew this wasn't right. One of the guards stepped forward, gently grabbed her wrist. The zip ties were cold, and then she was walked out, in front of 30 students, eyes wide, mouths open, all of them watching as if it were a spectacle on screen. Amira kept her head down. In the hallway, as they led her away, she looked back one last time, and saw Miss Kendall standing in the doorway, arms crossed, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. But it wasn't the smirk that shook Amira. It was what she noticed just behind her. A student near the back of the class, slipping their phone under the desk, filming the entire thing, and uploading it, real time. The video was already going live. What Amira didn't know yet was that everything was about to change, but not in the way she expected. It only took 13 seconds to change everything. 13 seconds of grainy cell phone footage, captured from the back row of AP English by a quiet boy named Nolan, who rarely spoke. No one even knew he had filmed it. He uploaded it to TikTok during lunch, barely thinking it through, just a caption. They cuffed a girl in class today. Wild. He tagged no one. He didn't need to. Within an hour, the video exploded. The screen shook as the classroom door opened and security walked in. The camera zoomed slightly to show Amira standing beside her desk, frozen. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't fighting. She was just stunned. Then the guards moved in. One wrapped a hand around her wrist. The other pulled out zip-tie cuffs. Her classmates didn't move, just stared. In the background stood Miss Kendall. Arms crossed, lips tight, no urgency in her body, no concern. And then the moment that made the video unforgettable. Amira turning her face toward the camera as the cuffs clicked into place, her lips trembling, eyes filled with confusion and disbelief, one tear falling slowly down her cheek. It was too real. Too raw. Too familiar. The comment section blew up. Why is she being arrested? What the F did she even do? This is straight up racism. But buried between the outrage were darker voices. This is what happens when they don't know their place. Act right or get dragged out. Period. Bet she was about to go off. Miss Kendall handled that perfectly. The school issued a vague statement by 3. We take the safety and emotional well-being of all our students seriously. Halcyon Prep remains committed to fostering a respectful academic environment. While we cannot comment on specific student cases, we stand by our procedures and values. It said nothing, but it said everything. By sunset, the video had been reposted to Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, hashtags followed, cuffed at Halcyon, justice for Amira. This is school. By the next morning, major outlets had picked it up. The footage aired on local morning news. Chaos in the classroom. Student removed after aggressive outburst, despite there being no outburst. No yelling. Just silence, tears, and cuffs. Fox News had a field day. They ran the segment with a red banner, entitled Student Defies Veteran Teacher, and Plays the Victim. One commentator called her a troubled teen looking for attention. No one reached out to ask her what happened. Not a single journalist called her father. Because by then Amira had already been suspended. Indefinitely. The office called that evening. The voice was calm, too polite. We're placing Amira on leave until further notice, pending review. We want to ensure the classroom remains a safe space for all involved. The word safe scraped like glass across Marcus Johnson's nerves. But Amira had already told him she needed time. I just want to be home, she had said. So he hadn't pushed. He hadn't seen the video yet. He didn't know the internet was branding his daughter a menace. But Amira knew. She knew because her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Hundreds of notifications. People she didn't even know DMing her. Screenshots circulating. Classmates posting vague subtweets. Some people don't belong in honors and it shows. Her name became a cautionary tale. A symbol. But of what? To some she was the victim. To others the threat. She deleted the apps. Turned her phone face down. Still it haunted her. The feeling of plastic biting her wrists. The echo of her shoes against tile, as she was marched down the hallway like a criminal. The looks on their faces. None of them tried to stop it. Not one. She stopped eating. Not on purpose, but every time she tried, her stomach turned. She would sit at the table, fork in hand, barely able to swallow. Marcus noticed. So did her aunt, who dropped off groceries, and asked if she needed to talk. Amira said no. The words were caught somewhere inside her. She sat in her room most days, blinds drawn, headphones on but no music playing. She watched the video on loop, until her eyes blurred. Then she stopped watching it altogether. In school, Ms. Kendall remained untouched. Amira's email to Ms. Weaver went unanswered. Her request for an appeal was delayed, pending administrative process. Marcus pressed for answers. They told him to be patient. It's under review, they said. We have protocols. But they never called her back. She was 17 days into her suspension when she stopped speaking altogether. Whispers. That's all that came out. She would nod. Shake her head. But no full sentences. Her father started sitting outside her room at night, just listening. Once he heard her crying, soft, contained, like someone trying not to exist too loudly. He didn't know what to do, so he waited, until the day he found out the truth. It was a Friday. 2 weeks post-suspension. Marcus was cleaning the kitchen when his brother sent him a link with no context. Just one line. This your kid? He clicked. The screen filled with the classroom.
The cuffs.
The tear. His daughter. Marcus stood in silence, hands trembling, watching every second. Every detail. He watched it twice. 3 times. Then he closed his laptop slowly. He didn't yell. He didn't speak. He walked upstairs and knocked once on Amira's door. Baby girl, he said. No response. He opened the door gently. She was on the bed, knees hugged to her chest, headphones on but not plugged in. He sat beside her, holding the laptop. I saw it, he said. She didn't look at him. I saw all of it. Still no reply. I need you to tell me why no one called me. She shook her head barely. Amira, you don't gotta protect me from this. Silent. He leaned in, voice low. What they did to you. That wasn't school. That was war. That made her eyes flick toward him. He continued, voice heavy with something ancient. I wore a uniform for 16 years. Carried a rifle through countries where I didn't speak the language, because I believed I was protecting something better back home. But this? He pointed to the paused video. This is what they call better? Her lip trembled. I fought for my country, and they couldn't even give you a desk without fear? A sound escaped her, not a cry, but something rawer, something old. I'm sorry I didn't say anything, she whispered. I'm sorry I wasn't paying attention, he replied. He stood, walked out the room, without another word. Downstairs he pulled out a dusty black briefcase from the closet, opened it. Inside were documents, medals, discharge papers. He pulled one folder from the bottom. It had a government seal, and it had his lawyer's number. Back upstairs, Amira scrolled through her phone one last time, despite herself. And there it was, a new post. A screenshot of a private group chat between students. Someone had leaked it. The caption above the image made her heart stop. Miss Kendall's been planning this for weeks. The message echoed in Amira's mind all night. You should drop that class. Not your place. She didn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, trying to make sense of it. Was it just one student? Or more? Did Miss Kendall see it too? Did she care? By morning Amira was exhausted. But a fire had started inside her, small but burning. Her father left early, as usual, and she stood in the mirror alone, brushing her hair back into a tight bun. Today she wouldn't let them silence her. At 10:07 a.m., during her free period, she walked into the student services wing and stopped outside the counselor's office. The nameplate read, Ms. Weaver, Academic and Personal Guidance. Inside, the walls were covered with pastel posters about growth mindset and choosing kindness. The irony wasn't lost on her. She knocked once, waited, then entered. Ms. Weaver looked up from her computer. Mid-30s, blonde bob, pearl earrings. She offered a tight smile. Hi, Amira. What brings you in? Amira sat down slowly, gripping her backpack strap. Her voice shook. I need to talk about something happening in AP English. Ms. Weaver leaned back, steepling her fingers. Okay, what kind of something? It's the way I'm being treated, Amira said, eyes lowering. By Miss Kendall, and some students. I don't think it's fair, and it doesn't feel like it's just about schoolwork. Ms. Weaver's smile froze. In what way? Amira swallowed. I got a D- on my essay. It was crumpled and thrown in my locker afterward, and someone left a note telling me I didn't belong in the class. I think, she hesitated. I think it's racial. Ms. Weaver blinked, slowly leaned forward. Amira, are you sure you're not just overwhelmed? It's a rigorous program. It's normal to struggle with transitions. Amira's breath caught. No, I'm not overwhelmed. I'm being targeted. There was a pause, the kind that feels like a decision being made behind someone's eyes. Let's not rush to label something racism, Ms. Weaver said carefully. It's a serious accusation, and Miss Kendall is one of our most experienced faculty members. Amira's throat closed. I'm not accusing, I'm telling you how it feels. I'm being treated differently, and it's not just me, it's how people look at me, how I'm always the one being corrected, blamed, ignored. Ms. Weaver stood and walked to a cabinet. She pulled out a generic intake form and slid it across the desk. Why don't you write down what happened? I'll make a note in your file and we can monitor the situation. The words hit Amira like a cold slap. A note in her file. Will you actually do something about it? Mrs. Weaver offered a bland smile. Try to be more positive, Amira. Focus on the opportunities. Let's not get distracted. Amira didn't remember walking out of the office, but she did. Her legs moved on autopilot. Her mouth was dry, eyes burning. The message was clear. She was alone. What followed wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet warfare. In the next AP English class, Miss Kendall assigned a reading of To Kill a Mockingbird, and then, without warning, asked Amira to read the courtroom scene aloud. Amira hesitated, but began. The moment her voice trembled, Miss Kendall interrupted her. Speak clearly, Amira. Try not to sound dramatic. Laughter, a cough, then silence. Later, during a peer review session, Amira's suggestions were ignored. Her partner, Paige, wrote them down, then repeated the same ideas to the class as her own. Miss Kendall praised her for brilliant insights. Amira stared at the floor. In history class, someone slipped a note onto her desk. No name. Just 4 words written in all caps. Stay in your place. The next day, during group projects, Amira was the last one chosen. Again, even when assigned, she was sidelined, her input dismissed or altered without consent. When the final presentation was submitted, her name wasn't even included. She told the teacher. "I thought you were just helping with the research," he said, unconcerned. When she tried to eat lunch outside to escape the whispers in the cafeteria, she found her usual spot under the tree already taken by 3 girls who didn't move or speak. They just watched her approach, then laughed as she turned away. Her grades began to slip, not because she didn't understand the material, but because she couldn't breathe in the classrooms. Anxiety wrapped itself around her lungs like barbed wire. Her hands shook when she tried to write. At night, she stared at her assignments but couldn't focus. Her father noticed. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked over dinner one night, eyes scanning her face. She nodded quickly, keeping her gaze on her plate. "I'm just tired." He didn't press. He never did. Marcus Johnson had seen war. He had learned to recognize the signs of quiet pain, but he had also learned to respect the walls people built to survive it. He watched her a little longer that night, then said nothing more. By the 3rd week, she no longer raised her hand in class. The erasure was nearly complete. But then something happened that cracked through her silence. She returned from gym class early, needing to grab her jacket from her locker. The hallway was nearly empty, just a faint echo of sneakers and shouts from the gymnasium. Her locker was near the stairwell, always isolated, always quiet. She turned the corner and stopped cold. Her locker was open. Not broken open. The lock still dangled from the latch, snapped loose. Her books were untouched, but on the inside of the metal door, something new had been scratched deep into the paint. A word,
monkey,
carved in jagged lines, deep and deliberate. For a moment, Amira couldn't move, couldn't blink. Her knees trembled, her breath hitched. She backed away from it like it might strike her. And then she ran. She didn't know where, just ran down the hall, past the guidance office, past the library, into the girls' restroom on the 2nd floor. She collapsed into the farthest stall and locked the door behind her. Only then did the tears come. Not soft, cinematic tears. Ugly ones. Raw sobs. The kind that felt like drowning in your own chest. She pressed her sleeve to her mouth to muffle the sound, shaking violently. It wasn't just a bad teacher anymore. It wasn't just a cold shoulder or a bad grade. It was hatred. Someone hated her enough to leave a scar. She cried until her throat hurt, until her fists were clenched so tight they ached. Then she stood, wiped her face, and walked out. As she stepped into the hallway, pale-faced and hollow, she nearly collided with Miss Kendall, who looked her up and down with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, softly, "You should be more careful where you leave your things open." Amira froze. The locker. The word. Was she implying something? Or confessing? Her body went cold. But before she could speak, Miss Kendall turned and walked away. Back straight. Confident. Untouchable. And Amira realized this wasn't just about silencing her. It was about destroying her completely. Marcus Johnson didn't sleep that night. He sat in the living room long after the lights were out upstairs, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. The video looped on his laptop again and again, not because he wanted to see it, but because he couldn't not see it. Every frame etched itself into his memory like a brand. Amira's slumped shoulders, the expression on her face when the zip ties were pulled tight, the stillness in her eyes that said, "I already knew this was coming." He watched the background too. The other kids looking away. Some shocked, others numb. And always, that teacher, Ms. Kendall, standing in the corner like a warden at a prison, watching the removal of a problem she no longer had to contain. It was almost 4 a.m. when Marcus stood up from the couch and closed the laptop. He didn't slam it. He didn't pace the room or break anything. He just moved with that eerie calm, the kind that came from years in combat zones, from funerals attended in full dress uniform, from watching friends bleed out in the desert while politicians gave speeches back home. He showered, dressed in a charcoal button-down and black jeans. Then he reached into the back of the hallway closet and pulled out the keys. The Suburban waited in the garage like a dormant beast. Black, waxed clean, military-grade suspension. Bought 2 years after his discharge. It had never felt more necessary than today. By 6:57 a.m., he was rolling through the gates of Halcyon Preparatory Academy. The security guard gave him a long look, then opened the barrier without a word. Students streamed onto campus, collared shirts, and tote bags fluttering in the morning breeze. They walked past Marcus's parked SUV without noticing who was inside. Most had already seen the video, but their day was just beginning. Calculus quizzes, cafeteria drama, forgotten homework. They didn't expect war to arrive before first period. At exactly 7:59, the school bell rang, and Marcus stepped out. His boots touched the pavement with a deep thud. Solid, measured, the same way he'd walked into foreign embassies and conflict zones. The kind of walk that announced itself without saying a word. He crossed the parking lot slowly, ignoring the curious looks from a few students. His shoulders were squared, posture perfect. The silence followed him like a shadow. Inside the front office, the receptionist looked up. She blinked. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you?" "I'm here to speak to Miss Kendall." She hesitated. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," he said, voice even. "But you're going to get her. I can see if she's available." He didn't move. "Do that." The edge in his voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. She picked up the phone with hands that suddenly weren't steady. A few moments passed. A door creaked open behind the front desk, and Principal James Carlyle emerged. Salt and pepper hair, pressed tie, practiced smile, the face of control. "Mr. Johnson," he greeted cautiously, "why don't we step into my office? I'm here to speak with the teacher who had my daughter handcuffed in front of a class," Marcus said. "That your office can wait." Carlyle's smile faded. "We can't discuss student matters without due process." Marcus took one deliberate step closer. "Someone hurt my daughter," he said softly, but with a weight that made the air shift. "Someone tried to break her. You tell me why I shouldn't be standing in front of her classroom right now, asking why." Carlyle glanced at the receptionist. She looked down, pretending to busy herself with paperwork. "Let's talk," the principal said finally, leading Marcus into a side room with glass windows that looked out onto the hallway. They sat. The door clicked shut behind them. "First of all," Carlyle began, folding his hands, "we take any allegation of misconduct seriously. That's a rehearsed line." Marcus replied, "Don't insult me." Carlyle flinched slightly. "Mr. Johnson, I understand emotions are high, but Miss Kendall is a valued educator. She's a racist in a cardigan." Carlyle blinked. "I can't allow that characterization without proper investigation." "Have you watched the video?" "I have." Marcus leaned forward. "Then you saw exactly what I saw. A teacher who stood there and let a black girl get paraded out in cuffs. And not just any girl. My girl. She was disruptive. She was cornered. And if she was disruptive, explain why the kids who filmed it are calling her a victim. There are always multiple sides. No, there's just the truth. And you're not telling it." The principal exhaled. His tone shifted. "Look, Mr. Johnson, these things are complex. We're navigating social media fallout, parent emails, press inquiries." Marcus slid an envelope across the desk. Carlyle stopped. "What's this?" "My legal team's introduction." He opened it. Read the header. "Federal civil rights firm. Reputable. High profile." "If you won't listen to a father," Marcus said, "you'll listen to the lawsuit." Carlyle paled slightly. "We'll be suing the district, the administration, and Miss Kendall personally, for racial discrimination, emotional abuse, and endangerment of a minor. You'll also be hearing from several advocacy groups, because after today, this doesn't stay in your conference room." The principal swallowed. "You're escalating this. You escalated this when you let a child be cuffed like a criminal for raising her voice in defense of her own humanity." For a long moment, the room was still. Marcus stood. "You can call your lawyers," he said, "but first you better call Ms. Kendall. Because when the press gets this, when people start asking why a girl who was never violent, never failed a test, never even skipped lunch was treated like a felon." He leaned close. "You're gonna wish the worst part of your week was my knock on your door." He turned and walked out. Flashback. A memory Marcus hadn't touched in years. Iraq. 2006. A little boy with a makeshift bandage around his shoulder. Shaking hands. Soft eyes. Marcus had handed him a water bottle. Gently touched his hair. The interpreter whispered, "He asks if you'll protect his sister next." Marcus had smiled. "Of course I will." That little girl had been safe. But here he was, years later, wondering why he couldn't promise the same to his own daughter inside a school funded by his taxes, protected by his flag. He walked back into the sunlight. A few students had gathered by the SUV now, whispering. One of them, a girl with braids and thick glasses, stepped forward timidly. "Are you Amira's dad?" Marcus paused. "Yes." She glanced around. I hope she's okay. She didn't deserve what happened." He nodded, softly. "Thank you." Another voice joined, this time a boy, maybe 17. "They act like Kendall walks on water, but she's been like this for years." The girl looked at him. "You gonna fight them?" Marcus met her gaze. "I already am." Inside the office, Principal Carlisle picked up the phone and dialed Miss Kendall's extension. She didn't answer. He tried her classroom. Still no answer. Then he checked his inbox. At the top unread was an email. From L. Kendall at Halcyon Prep. Subject: formal leave request. He clicked it open. Effective immediately. I am requesting an indefinite leave of absence due to a hostile work environment and reputational damage. I will not be returning to Halcyon Prep until my name has been cleared. Carlisle stared at the screen. Miss Kendall was gone, but the storm had just begun. The image of Miss Kendall disappeared from Halcyon Prep's halls, like dust shaken from old velvet. 1 week after her leave of absence, no teacher dared mention her name out loud. Yet her ghost hovered in every hallway. Students whispered. Parents speculated. The board scrambled behind frosted glass conference rooms. And still Miss Kendall herself hadn't uttered a public word. Until she did. It started on a Thursday night, just after the school issued its second "We Are Listening and Learning" statement, and the Johnsons' lawsuit gained traction on national platforms. Screens across America flickered to life on a conservative cable news network's primetime show. There she was. Lauren Kendall, hair softly curled, glasses carefully chosen, wearing a muted navy blouse, professional, maternal, safe. The Chiron read. Veteran teacher canceled for demanding academic standards. The host leaned in. "Lauren, thank you for being brave enough to come forward. I know this can't be easy." Miss Kendall nodded, lips drawn into a somber smile. "It's been devastating. But truth matters." The interview began with sympathy. The host played footage from the viral video, only clips carefully edited. They skipped the zip ties, cut out the tear, zoomed in on the security walking in, not on the classroom's frozen fear. "She became aggressive," Miss Kendall said. "I've spent over 20 years fostering excellence in my classrooms. I expect rigor, structure. I treat every student equally, and when I hold someone accountable, I'm labeled a racist." The host nodded solemnly. "It's reverse discrimination, plain and simple." Miss Kendall pressed her point. "This isn't about color. This is about consequences. That student, Amira, refused to follow directions. She disrupted class. She challenged authority. And now, because her father has money and a vendetta, I'm being painted as some kind of villain." She looked directly into the camera. "They're trying to cancel me because I demanded excellence." It worked. For a moment it worked. Supporters flooded in. Old colleagues, parents from her earlier years, and conservative activists who saw her as the latest casualty in the culture war. A GoFundMe appeared within hours. Help Miss Kendall fight back. It raised over $50,000 by the end of the weekend. Online, hashtags trended. Stand with Kendall. Stop the witch hunt. Teachers under attack. Comments read like gospel in her echo chamber. She's the real victim. These people want special treatment. Amira sounds like a brat. You can't even discipline kids anymore. In chat rooms and under the radar message boards. The story mutated. Fabricated stories circulated. Amira had threatened Kendall. She had pushed a classmate. She was on probation before any of this happened. None of it was true, but it didn't matter. Kendall's narrative had found an audience. But stories, real ones, don't stay buried forever. Somewhere far from the noise, a freelance journalist named Dana Lively was watching quietly. She wasn't a celebrity anchor. She didn't host panels. She didn't wear pearl-studded jackets or talk over grieving parents. She took notes. She'd seen the Kendall interview once. Then again, something didn't sit right. The smile, the calmness, the use of words like equality, while discrediting a black teenager on national television. So Dana started digging. It began with public records, tenure reports, archived staff directories, anonymized disciplinary logs. What she found wasn't shocking, it was common. But that's what made it so dangerous. Complaints. Notes. 3 different years. 3 different black girls removed from Kendall's class mid-semester. Behavioral concerns. Inability to integrate into class dynamics. Parental pressure. One report cited passive-aggressive disrespect as cause for removal. Dana dug deeper, reached out to alumni on LinkedIn, sent confidential interview requests. Her inbox started filling slowly at first, then faster. A black graduate from 2017. She once asked if I was on food stamps after I wrote about poverty in my essay. A Latino boy from 2015. She said my English was too emotional, and that it would never get me into college. A biracial girl from 2019. She told me the only reason I made the honor roll was because of how the system works now. Every story was a quiet cut. Each one opened a wound that hadn't healed. Dana compiled it all. Fact-checked, confirmed, redacted names, protected identities. Then she published it. Headline: Not the first. A pattern of silencing students of color at Halcyon Prep. The article dropped late Sunday night. Within 12 hours, it had over 1 million reads. The media turned. The supporters began to fade. Ms. Kendall didn't comment, but her GoFundMe stalled. Local students, white, black, and otherwise, gathered at the gates of Halcyon Prep. Monday morning with cardboard signs: Black education matters. We are not disruptive. We're ignored. Amira wasn't the first, but she'll be the last. Parents joined. Alumni shared. Staff whispered behind locked doors. Kendall's images as a misunderstood martyr began to crack. Inside the Johnson home, Amira sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. Her father placed Dana's article gently in front of her. You don't have to read it, he said. But if you do, just know it's not just you anymore. Amira stared at the title. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through the testimonies. One after another. Different names. Same story. She wasn't alone. Meanwhile, Kendall's silence was not submission. In a rented condo 2 towns over, she met with her attorney and PR team, fuming over every sentence. They're building a narrative, she snapped. One based on feelings, not facts. Her attorney advised caution. Her PR rep had another idea. Control the next story, she said. Release your side, leak their mistakes, plant doubt, question the father. Kendall narrowed her eyes. They'll believe it? They want to. People want reasons to turn away. That night, Kendall wrote an internal email. One she never expected to be shared. But someone shared it anyway. The next morning, a screenshot appeared on Twitter. It showed a private message Miss Kendall had sent to another teacher just 2 weeks before the incident. I don't know how long I'm supposed to pretend this quota filler is capable of honors work. I've had enough. The internet exploded. So did Halcyon Prep's phones. And for the first time since her leave began, Lauren Kendall's name stopped trending for sympathy. Now it trended for something else entirely. Disgrace. The leaked email lit a fuse that could no longer be contained. Quota filler. 2 words scrawled in private, but now burned across the national consciousness, like graffiti on the side of America's most fragile institution, education. Lauren Kendall had intended it for a trusted colleague, a fellow educator, who had stayed silent as long as silence served them. But someone forwarded the message, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of fear, and the digital trail did the rest. Screenshots don't lie, and America was listening now. Within 24 hours, the New York Times published a feature, The Silent Segregation of Excellence, How Elite Programs Fail Black Students. Amira's name was in the first paragraph, not as a cautionary tale, but as a symbol, a human emblem of a structure built to include the word diversity in mission statements, but exclude it from classrooms. Other headlines followed. Too smart to belong. The invisible barriers facing Black honors students. Gifted but isolated. How racism is embedded in advanced academics. What happened to Amira Johnson should have never been possible. Televised town halls featured her story. Podcasts debated policy versus people. Influencers posted videos crying into their phone cameras. Hashtagging I stand with Amira. But underneath the noise, beneath the trending banners and blue check voices, real numbers surfaced. 6 buys more likely. That was the number that would haunt districts across the country. Black girls were 6 times more likely to be suspended than white girls. Despite no statistical evidence they misbehaved more. The data came from a federal report published years ago. Buried, ignored. But now the infographic bearing Amira's photo and that damning statistic was everywhere. It showed her cuffed in the classroom, flanked by the caption, She raised her hand. They raised their voices. She raised her voice. They raised the alarm. Civil rights organizations sprang into action, not just for Amira, but because they had been waiting. For years they had documented the gatekeeping baked into accelerated programs, subjective teacher recommendations, racially biased behavior reports, under-identification of black gifted students. Now they had a face for their evidence, a narrative for their spreadsheets, a story that would move hearts as well as minds. The NAACP filed an amicus brief, supporting the Johnson lawsuit. The ACLU opened a parallel investigation into Halcyon's admissions criteria. A coalition of black educators created a task force to audit local schools for discriminatory tracking, all sparked by one girl's unraveling. Amira didn't ask to be the symbol, but the weight was already on her shoulders. Halcyon wasn't alone. Public and private schools across the country suddenly found themselves under microscopes. Emails were requested, discipline logs were re-examined, AP and honors enrollment demographics were posted publicly, sometimes for the first time. In affluent districts, parents grew uneasy. Some supported change, others whispered in closed groups. Are they going to lower the bar? We just want the best for our kids. They're going to ruin the program. In one school in Missouri, a black freshman girl was quietly moved up into honors English, after her mother forwarded screenshots of Amira's story to the superintendent. In another school in Maryland, 2 teachers were reassigned after an internal audit revealed they hadn't recommended a single black student to AP courses in 5 years. Change didn't sweep. It creaked, but it began. And Amira was at the center of the storm. She stayed mostly offline, still reeling from what had been done to her body, her name, her childhood. But sometimes late at night she'd scroll. She saw her face reshared by strangers with captions like, "Our hero and this is what strength looks like." She felt numb. Does any of this matter if I still can't walk into a classroom without shaking? She once asked her father quietly. Marcus didn't have an answer. But when a handwritten letter arrived in their mailbox, from a black girl in Idaho, who wrote, "Because of you I finally told my teacher to stop calling me aggressive," Amira folded it into her journal and held it like proof that maybe she wasn't just surviving. Maybe she was fighting back. At the school board level, Halcyon continued to fracture. Donors backed out of annual galas. Enrollment for incoming juniors dipped. A resignation letter leaked, one that mentioned irreparable damage to reputation and failure to address embedded bias. Even some teachers began to speak anonymously. She created a classroom where fear disguised itself as rigor. I didn't say anything because I needed the job. I wish I had protected her. I wish I had protected them all. Meanwhile, Dana Lively, the journalist who first uncovered Kendall's past patterns, dug deeper. She traced an older case, 2012, a public charter in North Carolina, where Ms. Kendall had taught for 2 years before resigning for personal reasons. A girl there had reportedly withdrawn from the school mid-year. A former classmate claimed she'd been bullied by teachers. There were no formal records, no lawsuit, just whispers, just scars. Dana published a follow-up piece titled, "How Many Girls Had to Shrink Before She Was Stopped?" The pressure mounted. But Kendall wasn't finished. Her attorney filed a countersuit, defamation, emotional damage, professional sabotage. They claimed the Johnson family had weaponized the media, that Amira's emotional state had been exaggerated, manipulated. It was a strategic move, designed to make headlines and reframe the narrative. But it backfired again, because in response the federal judge overseeing the original lawsuit made a decision that shifted the case into dangerous territory for Kendall. A court order was issued. A subpoena for all of Miss Kendall's private school emails, including those to colleagues, administrators, former students, and her personal device. The court's request landed on her attorney's desk like a thunderclap. Kendall's hands trembled as she held the subpoena, not because she was unsure what they'd find, but because she knew exactly what she'd written over the years. In a folder on her hard drive was a thread of messages, casual, sarcastic, unfiltered. One, dated just 3 months before the incident, said plainly, "If I wanted to babysit trauma cases, I'd teach in the city." And now the courts were coming for it all. The Suburban rode low into the golden mid-morning light, its black paint absorbent of the glare, as if a physical shield in a war already declared. Marcus sat behind the wheel each day for a week, waiting for an answer, one that hadn't come. The waiting had transformed into resolve. He wasn't just defending his daughter anymore. He was holding the entire school accountable. That Monday, the driveway to his lawyer's office unspooled before him like a battlefield. He parked, stepped out into a hubless lobby, and climbed into a narrow corner office where the walls were lined with framed judicial statutes and encouragements. Words like justice, equal protection, united we stand. He closed the door behind him. His lawyer, Elaine Moore, sat across from him, pen tracing circles on a legal pad like a heartbeat. She looked up. You ready? Marcus exhaled. Yes. Days later, the lawsuit was officially filed. The documents were sterile, heavy, and shattering. A federal civil rights complaint naming Halcyon Preparatory Academy, the school district, Principal Carlisle, Ms. Kendall, and the security officers, all under Title VI and Section. Claims of racial discrimination, emotional distress, and failure to accommodate a safe learning environment for a student of color were laid bare, meticulously detailed. Amira was listed as the plaintiff, a minor, with Marcus as co-plaintiff, backed by a powerful civil rights firm known for winning landmark education cases. The filing included statements, video stills, images of the locked cuffs, the public humiliations, the silence that followed. Finally, someone was calling it what it was. Within hours of the filing, Halcyon Prep's gates felt different. News vans were staged. Professional lights began to cast long beams across manicured courtyards. Reporters hovered near the statue of the school's founder, pretending to be tourists, flipping open laptops and whispering. By noon, CNN had posted, "Private school faces discrimination lawsuit amid viral arrest." A chyron flashed beneath. Resident files federal complaint. Video shows black teen in handcuffs after classroom confrontation. Local stations followed. Interviews with anonymous students aired. Some supportive, some confused, and the backlash hit the faculty group chat like a jolt. One message to another: we can't simply rely on reputation anymore. This will shred the school's image in front of parents with deep pockets. Meanwhile, on social media, Amira wasn't just a name anymore. She became a symbol. Anonymous accounts surfaced. "I'm a black student here." And she wasn't the first. "I stopped taking her class because she always called me lazy. She told me I'd never make it past community college." Each revelation landed like a blow to the credibility of Miss Kendall, the school's legacy, and the silence that made it all work. A medium student one morning in the cafeteria told Amira, softly, "Sorry I laughed. I didn't know." She nodded. Forgiveness wasn't expected, but healing was dawning. Within 48 hours, the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, OCR, confirmed an investigation had been opened. A Title VI inquiry into potential racial harassment and violation of civil rights in a federally funded educational environment. It was a rare step against a private school, signaling that no one was above scrutiny when it came to racism. The school board convened an emergency meeting. Parents spoke in hushed tones between themselves in the hallways. Sponsors, anxious and calculating, began pulling logos off event banners. Lifeblood partners for extracurricular programs and grants evaporated overnight. Overnight, Halcyon Prep was no longer the fortress it pretended to be. The suitors with blank checks retreated. The alumni network fell silent. Amira's story rippled outward into national discourse. College campus newspapers picked it up. Education blogs posted essays. When discipline becomes discrimination, civil rights organizations on Twitter lit up with hashtags, "Stand with Amira," "Stop school racism," "Black girls deserve better." They reposted her speech, shared her face, wrote op-eds from every corner of the country. In urban classrooms, students paused lectures to watch the video. Discussion prompts: when does discipline cross into oppression? Inside Halcyon, chaos reigned behind the scenes. Legal briefs arrived. Parents demanded refunds. The board chair called for Carlisle's resignation. But Carlisle, beaten and drained, called a press conference. His voice flat, scratched with desperation. "We cooperate with investigations. We regret any student upset," he said. But the words didn't land. There was no weight, no authenticity. Parents shifted uncomfortably, not ready to believe, not capable of ignoring. Ms. Kendall vanished from sight. That afternoon, Carlisle walked into his office and found a letter on his desk. The envelope was plain, but the typeface was crisp. He opened it with trembling hands. Inside, a typed note from Ms. Kendall. "Effective immediately, I am placing myself on leave, citing reputational damage and the hostile, unfair narrative I have been subjected to. I intend to return once matters are settled. Thank you." The line echoed, hostile, unfair narrative. He stared at the words until the ink blurred. What no one yet knew: Miss Kendall was not retreating. She was mobilizing. In the week to come, she'd quietly started assembling her own defense team, targeting not only the school's decision, but also Mr. Johnson himself. She'd called former students, promising confidentiality. She would tell a different story, one built on her decades of service, framed by alleged defamation, and fueled by a whispered conspiracy that Marcus had orchestrated more than just outrage. He'd waged war. The next morning, an anonymous envelope arrived at Marcus's doorstep. Inside, a single photograph. A young Amira in a uniform not of her choosing. Marcus held the photo, breath caught tight, as the image came alive with silent accusation. The email subpoena had barely landed before the leaks began. At first it was a whisper on Reddit, then a private Twitter thread. Then screenshots started appearing, unedited, unfiltered, messages pulled directly from Ms. Kendall's internal communications. Not just one, dozen, strings of conversations between her and two other staff members at Halcyon Prep, spanning over a year. They had no idea who leaked them. The speculation was wild. An IT staffer, a disgruntled teacher, a student intern with access. No one knew for sure, but someone had decided enough was enough. The public saw the first one on a Tuesday morning. Ms. Kendall, FEP 6. These honors apps are getting laughable. It's like watching a parade of quota fillers. The internet stopped. Within hours, another dropped. Ms. Kendall, Mar 3. One girl writes like she's doing slam poetry at a community center. Not even proper grammar. Mr. Hayes. Another teacher. Ella, which one? Miss Kendall. The time bomb in my third period. You'll know her when you see her. Whole vibe screams activist in training. The girl she was referring to was Amira. That thread went viral, and then the floodgates opened. Text after text, email after email, an entire history of contempt dressed up in wit. Miss Kendall, May 12. We're not running a reform camp, we're running a school. Time to clean up the gene pool a bit. Mr. Hayes, say it louder for the board.
Miss Kendall.
Seriously, these kids need social work, not Shakespeare. Miss Patel, third teacher. Just got my third email from that kid's dad. I swear these parents think they're raising Beyonce. Miss Kendall. More like raising court cases. Just wait. The damage was immediate and total. Halcyon Prep went into complete lockdown. PR teams were pulled off external campaigns and reassigned to damage control. Board members resigned quietly. 2 staff members who had been copied on the messages but never responded were asked to leave. National outrage erupted like a pressure valve finally released. The cruelty wasn't just implied now. It was documented, stamped, time-stamped, archived. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a demand for excellence. It was hate. Institutional, habitual, normalized. CNN hosted a panel that night. One commentator, an education policy analyst, read the gene pool line aloud. Her voice cracked as she paused. You don't write that about students, unless you believe it. You don't laugh at it unless it's part of your culture. This isn't just about one teacher. It's about the silence that let her thrive. The ACLU called for a federal monitor to audit Halcyon's entire academic structure. The Secretary of Education tweeted support for Amira by name, calling the messages revolting and disqualifying. Meanwhile, Amira watched from the couch, expression unreadable. Her father sat beside her, barely blinking. Marcus hadn't said much since the leak began. He didn't need to. The world was finally catching up to the fire he had seen months ago. And it burned hotter now than he could have imagined. Calls poured in. Journalists, civil rights leaders, parents, students. A black senator's office requested to interview Amira for a committee hearing on racial inequity in education. Oprah's team reached out. But through it all, she stayed quiet. Because the words kept echoing. Time bomb. Gene pool. Slam poetry. Court case. Every syllable was like being spit on. And worse, being spit on when they thought you'd never see it. The school district scrambled to react. In a late-night board meeting, 3 legal advisors sat in uncomfortable chairs as the superintendent paced with a binder of printed screenshots. This isn't just liability, one said. This is national scandal. If we don't settle, we risk being the face of institutional racism for the next decade. And the reality was, there were other messages. Unreleased. Floating. Threatening to drop at any moment. The next morning, the board made an offer. A settlement in the high 6 figures, plus a full public apology, and a promise to fund a district-wide racial equity audit and policy overhaul. But Marcus wasn't moved. He didn't want a check. He wanted justice and transparency. So they declined. Amira's name stayed on the lawsuit. Back at Halcyon, students finally had enough. Organized through private group chats and whispers, hundreds staged a walkout. At exactly 10:00 a.m., students walked out of class, filing silently into the courtyard, wearing black shirts that said, "I am not a time bomb." Some held signs, "Excellence is not white. Gifted, Neil, privileged." Amira deserved better. For the first time, Amira stepped onto campus not as a target, but as a movement. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. But she stood. And for those few minutes, no one looked away. The twist came not from a leak, but from a voice. An email landed in Dana Lively's inbox later that night. No subject, just a name, Mariah B. Attached was a document, a resignation letter dated 3 years ago. Mariah Barnes had been a junior English teacher at Halcyon for 4 years. Her message was short. "I couldn't stay quiet anymore. She destroyed students who looked like me. I tried to raise it with leadership. They told me I was imagining it, gaslit me, punished me. So I left, and I've lived with that silence ever since. I want to talk." Dana called immediately. Mariah's voice was shaky on the phone. "I warned them about Kendall," she said. "I told the board. I filed complaints." Dana paused. "And they told me I was divisive," Mariah whispered. "They said I was making things racial." Her voice cracked, but it was racial. She took a breath, then said the words that would ignite the next explosion. "And I have the original complaint letters. All of them. From the students. Before Amira ever walked into that school." Mariah Barnes's voice crackled through Dana Lively's phone like it carried the weight of years. "They told me I was the problem," she said. "Every time I tried to say something, they turned it around. I wasn't a team player. I was too sensitive. They said I brought race into everything." She paused, the silence on the line heavier than her words. "But the students knew. I still have their letters." By dawn, Dana had received scans of 3 complaint letters, all handwritten, all folded into the corners of aging notebook pages. Each one told the same story: overlooked ideas, biased grading, subtle mockery, unspoken but understood exclusions. All of them, from black or brown students. All dated between long before Amira Johnson ever walked into Halcyon's halls. Dana published her expose under a new headline. She warned them, how a teacher was punished for telling the truth. The story blew through the internet like a thunderclap. Mariah became a new kind of whistleblower, not a victim, but a survivor of institutional silence. Suddenly, other voices followed. A Puerto Rican math teacher, who worked at Halcyon in 2015, emailed anonymously. "I was warned not to get too friendly with students who struggled with culture shock." A black counselor, formerly with the district, messaged Dana privately. "We were told not to flag discipline trends by race. The board thought it would look political." Then came the substitute teacher who had filled in for Kendall once, just once, and had left the building with a knot in his stomach. She mocked one kid's pronunciation behind her back. "I reported it. HR never called me again." Dana published them all, changing names, redacting identities, but keeping the truth intact. The articles sent ripples through faculty lounges across the state. Teachers from nearby schools held emergency union meetings. Some demanded bias training. Others demanded that their own schools release racial discipline data. At Halcyon, everything ground to a halt. Classes were half full. Parents were in uproar. Teachers walked on eggshells. And the administration, those who hadn't already resigned, were being asked a single damning question. "Why didn't you speak up?" It became the question of the moment, echoed in op-eds, tweeted by activists, asked in protest signs. Where were the good teachers? If they knew, why didn't they say anything? The answer was complicated and devastating. A former Halcyon science teacher, Mr. Nguyen, agreed to go on record with Dana, under one condition: she wouldn't use his real name. He spoke with his hands folded in front of him, eyes fixed on the table. "There's this illusion in schools," he began, "that racism only exists when it's loud, when it's a slur or a fight or something physical. But here, it was all polite." He looked up. She smiled while she erased people. He recounted moments when he'd seen Ms. Kendall dismiss student ideas, subtly question their intelligence, and then call their parents to express concern over behavior that white students were never written up for. I knew it was wrong, he admitted. But I had a mortgage. A wife. Kids. I didn't think I could afford to be the first one to say something. Fear. That was the common thread across every voice. Fear of retaliation. Of blacklisting. Of being labeled angry or radical. Of losing jobs in a state with few protections for educators of color. One black teacher described it bluntly. I was surviving. Not teaching. Surviving. That building broke my heart a little more. Every semester. As more stories surfaced, a broader picture emerged. HR complaints at Halcyon had a pattern of disappearing. Officially, there were only 2 bias claims on file in the past decade. Unofficially, there were more than a dozen teachers who said their concerns were never documented. Or worse, met with subtle threats. You're not a cultural fit here. We're going in a different direction. Maybe take a semester off to reflect. It was language meant to silence. And for years it worked. Amira's case became a national reckoning. A bright spotlight on a machine fueled by neglect and cowardice. The silence of good people had made the abuse possible. And now, the silence was cracking. Parents across the district demanded independent audits, not just of Halcyon but of every school. They wanted the racial breakdown of AP classes published. They wanted anonymous climate surveys of students and staff. They wanted answers and accountability. At a town hall, a white mother stood up with tears in her eyes. My daughter was in that classroom, she said. She didn't do anything. She told me after. She felt like she should have, but she was scared. We raised her to do better than that. But fear runs deep. And I realize now, I've been scared too. Another parent followed, a Nigerian immigrant who once worked nights to afford private tuition. She was punished for being smart, he said. My daughter watched it happen. Now she's afraid to raise her hand in class. Meanwhile, Amira said very little. She was watching the world shift around her and trying to make sense of her own place in it. People called her brave, but she didn't feel brave. She felt tired. At a small support group for girls of color in gifted programs, she sat quietly as one student said, "Because of you, I stopped hiding how smart I am." Amira blinked. That night she wrote in her journal, "Is healing the same thing as justice? Or is it just what we do when justice takes too long?" But while the world began adjusting, Miss Kendall moved. Literally. It was a junior researcher at Dana's publication who noticed first. She had been scanning LinkedIn updates, teacher certification records, and online job postings when she stumbled across a curious profile. Lauren Kay, literacy curriculum consultant, Pine Valley Academy. Pine Valley was a local private school. Smaller, newer, less established. But expensive, exclusive, and quietly conservative in leadership. Lauren Kendall had updated her title just 3 days prior. The researcher flagged it. Dana confirmed it. She called Pine Valley that afternoon, posing as a parent looking for a tour. When she asked to meet with Miss Kendall to discuss their curriculum philosophy, the secretary cheerily replied, "Of course, Miss Kendall is new here but already beloved." Dana's heart thudded. Beloved. Lauren Kendall hadn't just gone silent. She had already started again. The day after Dana Lively's assistant confirmed Miss Kendall's new employment, Lauren's online footprint vanished. Her Twitter account gone. Her Facebook deactivated. LinkedIn scrubbed. Even old interviews on school blogs and PTA newsletters were taken offline, either by request or quiet deletion. Within 72 hours, it was as if she had never existed in the professional world at all. But the internet doesn't forget. And neither did the movement her cruelty birthed. Because while Lauren Kendall tried to disappear, her legacy had already been archived, screen recorded, and documented on more than one viral thread. Every message she sent, every joke she typed, every dismissal she claimed was misunderstood, it was still out there. And now she had tried to slip into a new position quietly, at a charter school 2 states away. But someone always notices. The discovery wasn't made by a journalist or a lawyer. It was a 17-year-old girl on TikTok. Her name was Zoya, a Pakistani-American student at a high school in North Carolina, and she had followed Amira's story obsessively. She'd seen every update, read the comments, and reposted articles with captions like, "This is what systemic racism looks like." One night, scrolling through local charter school job boards for her own upcoming senior year, Zoya froze. She saw the name L. Kendall listed as a new literacy consultant at Pine Valley Scholars Academy, a school her cousin was planning to apply to. Curious, she clicked. The staff bio was short, sanitized. But the photo gave it away. Same face, same glasses, Same smile that once watched Amira be dragged out of class in handcuffs. Zoya went live immediately. The TikTok hit 1.2 million views in 2 days. She showed receipts side-by-side images, matching timelines, archived screenshots of the leaked emails, and the bio from Pine Valley's website. She ended the video with, "She thought she could hide in another state. But we remember." The hashtag trended, "We remember Kendall." By the third day, a change.org petition had launched demanding her removal. It amassed over 150,000 signatures in 1 week. Parents of Pine Valley students started organizing. A group of mothers filed a formal inquiry with the board, demanding transparency in the hiring process. "How did no one vet her?" one parent asked in a PTA Zoom meeting. "Do we really want someone who joked about cleaning up the gene pool around our children?" Lauren Kendall, hiding behind drawn curtains in a rented bungalow, just outside Raleigh, watched her second life crumble just like her first. Her attorney advised silence. But silence had long stopped being her ally. In a last-ditch effort, she filed a defamation suit against Dana Lively, the Johnson family, and 2 national media outlets. The suit claimed character assassination, emotional distress, and coordinated professional sabotage. But the court wasn't moved. The judge dismissed the case within 3 weeks, citing that all the evidence published had been factual, verified, and drawn from direct communication authored by Ms. Kendall herself. She left the courtroom that day without a single reporter outside. No cameras. No outrage. Just quiet. The kind that meant she no longer controlled the narrative. Meanwhile, the world kept turning. But this time toward Amira. In just under a year, she had gone from invisible honors student to symbol of educational injustice, not by choice, but by necessity. And now, her story was being requested. An email arrived in her inbox one evening, as she worked through a makeup assignment for a college credit course. Subject line: Invitation to speak at the National Summit for Educational Equity, Washington, D.C. She stared at the screen, rereading it 3 times. The message was clear. They wanted her, Amira Johnson, to open the first morning panel with a speech, to tell her story, to explain what it felt like to be erased, then weaponized, then rewritten, to speak into a microphone and take back her own narrative. At first, she didn't answer. Her fingers hovered above the keys. Her father noticed the hesitation. "You don't have to do this," he said. She looked up. "I know." He waited a beat, then added, "But maybe you want to." Amira closed the laptop. She didn't need to decide right then. But somewhere, in the quiet hum between her heartbeats, something was changing. She was starting to believe she could say something the world wouldn't just hear, but listen to. The following morning, she opened her journal to write about the invitation. But before the pen could touch the paper, her phone buzzed, a notification from a national education watchdog page. The headline stopped her cold. Breaking: Pine Valley Academy, under investigation for hiring disgraced former educator, linked to racism scandal. Amira's name wasn't even mentioned, because the story had become bigger than her now. Washington, D.C. in late spring was humid and restless, like a city holding its breath. The National Summit for Educational Equity had always been an insiders' gathering, a safe, polished affair where bureaucrats and consultants exchanged policy notes behind keynote speeches that rarely made the news. But this year, everything was different. Security had doubled. Journalists packed the corridors. Students from over 40 states filled the rows of the grand ballroom, their badges swinging against chests like small shields. Everyone was waiting, and they weren't here for dead.
They were here for a girl with a story.
They were here for Amira Johnson. Backstage, Amira stood behind the curtain in a navy blue blazer and white blouse, her fingers trembling around the index cards she had rewritten 7 times. Her father stood beside her, silent but steady, like the weight of the earth itself. "You don't need to be perfect," Marcus whispered. "I know," she said, "but I need to be real." The announcer's voice echoed from the ballroom. "And now, to open our national summit, please welcome the student whose voice reshaped the conversation around race and equity in our schools, Miss Amira Johnson." The crowd erupted in applause, but Amira couldn't hear it at first. All she could hear was Miss Kendall's voice from months ago. "Let's hope you can keep up." And then, time bomb. Quota filler. Slam poetry. The pain pulsed behind her eyes. But she walked forward. 1 step, then another, until the lights hit her and the silence returned, and the world was finally listening. Her eyes scanned the audience: activists, teachers, politicians, students, Survivor. She didn't smile. She didn't perform. She just began. My name is Amira Johnson. I'm 17. And until this year, I thought my silence was a kind of safety. Her voice was soft at first, but it held. I grew up believing that if I worked hard, if I followed the rules, if I didn't talk back, the system would protect me. A pause. It didn't. The ballroom fell into stillness. I was told I didn't belong in honors. I was accused of plagiarism because I wrote too well. I was handcuffed in front of my classmates for speaking up, and I was told to take it as a learning experience. She swallowed hard, but didn't break. I didn't come here to relive the worst year of my life. I came here because I know what happens when we stay quiet. Her voice grew stronger. They said I was angry. I was too emotional. I was aggressive. But I wasn't angry. I was tired of being erased. Murmurs moved through the crowd. I was never too loud, she said, lifting her chin. I was just unheard. The room stood still for half a beat. Then it exploded. A full standing ovation. Some clapped. Some cried. Some just stood in stunned reverence. Because Amira hadn't just shared a story, she had shared theirs, and named it out loud. She stepped off the stage into her father's arms, not sobbing, not trembling, just breathing. Whole. The video was posted to every platform before she even left the building. Over 4 million views in 40. Clips of her final line trended under hashtags like, just unheard, Amira speak. Equity starts here. One congresswoman tweeted, if you watch one thing this year, let it be Amira Johnson's speech. Ellen reposted it. Trevor Noah played the clip on his show. But beyond the fame, something deeper stirred. Donations began pouring in. Not for Amira, but because of her. A civil rights foundation partnered with her family and created the Amira Johnson Rising Voices Fund, a scholarship for Black girls in public schools pursuing gifted programs or college prep tracks. It raised over $2 million in under a week. Applications opened immediately. The tagline read, not just gifted, just unheard. Amira didn't expect what came next. Letters. Hundreds. From students who'd been overlooked. From teachers who'd been silenced. From parents who'd buried rage under politeness. One letter came from a girl in Alabama. I stopped correcting my teachers when they called me by the wrong name. After your speech, I corrected them all. Twice. Another. You taught me my voice matters even if it shakes. Even a white teacher wrote, I was part of the silence, but not anymore. Meanwhile, Miss Kendall had gone silent again. Her name faded from the headlines. Her defamation case was dead. Her job offers were gone. Her GoFundMe had been frozen. But the system hadn't let go of her completely. In a quiet courtroom with no cameras and no reporters, the state's Department of Education had convened a formal review of her teaching license. They had everything. The texts, the emails, the transcripts from Amira's hearings, the leaked recordings from students who remembered more than they wanted to. The vote was unanimous. While Amira sat at her desk writing thank you notes to scholarship donors, an email pinged in her inbox from an unfamiliar address. State Board decision regarding former educator Lauren Kendall. She clicked it. Read the first line. Then exhaled. Long, slow, like letting go of a weight she didn't realize she'd carried this whole time. Her teaching license has been permanently revoked. Effective immediately. The courtroom was colder than Amira expected. It wasn't grand or cinematic. No wood-paneled walls or echoing gavel strikes. Just fluorescent lights, worn carpet, and a judge who barely looked up from his notes until it was time to read the ruling. But still, Amira's heart raced as if it were the center of the universe. She sat in the front row beside her father, shoulders tight, hands folded in her lap. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His presence was its own fortress. The federal civil rights case of Johnson v. Halcyon Prep District had taken nearly 9 months to reach this moment. 9 months of filings, depositions, articles, press conferences, countersuits, smear campaigns, walkouts, apologies, and silence. 9 months of carrying a wound, not visible but still raw. Now finally, they would hear what the system had to say. The judge cleared his throat. After reviewing the presented evidence, including documented communication from faculty, eyewitness testimony, expert analysis on racial discipline disparities, and the plaintiff's lived experience, this court finds in favor of the plaintiffs. A hush swept through the room like a breeze. Amira blinked, unsure she had heard it right. The court further orders the Halcyon Preparatory District to pay a sum of $2.5 million in damages, $1 million in direct damages to the plaintiff's family, and 1.5 million to be allocated toward racial equity initiatives across the district under independent supervision. A gasp escaped from somewhere behind them. Marcus's hand tightened on Amira's knee. But the judge wasn't done. The district is required to issue a formal public apology within 5 business days, publish its AP and honors admission demographic data for the last 10 years, and submit to an annual federal audit for the next 3 academic cycles. And then the final sentence. This case reflects a failure not just of one educator, but of a structure that chose silence over accountability. Let this be the beginning of correction, not the end. Gavel strike. Done. The courtroom emptied slowly, cameras waiting outside, microphones poised. Amira didn't walk out to cheers. She walked out to light. Blinding flashbulbs. Questions shouted. How does it feel to win? What would you say to other students going through this? Do you think justice was served? She didn't answer any of them. She just walked into the sunlight beside her father, her hands empty, but her voice whole. The public apology was released that Friday. A statement signed by the Halcyon Prep Superintendent Board President. We failed. We allowed bias, both explicit and systemic, to harm a student we were supposed to protect. We did not listen soon enough. We did not act decisively, and we recognized the pain that silence caused. Some called it too late. Others called it the blueprint. Either way, it was read aloud on the local news, printed in national papers, and mailed home to every parent in the district. For Amira, it meant more than just words. It meant precedent. It meant no other black girl would be able to say, "They didn't believe me," because now the courts had. Colleges reached out before she could apply. Stanford, Yale, Howard, NYU, Spelman, Georgetown. Some sent handwritten notes. Others sent full scholarships. The letters came with bold statements. We are committed to supporting your brilliance, your resilience, and your leadership. Amira chose Howard, not because it was the biggest, but because it was the first one where she didn't feel like she'd need to explain herself. Miss Kendall, meanwhile, vanished. No social media, no job listings, no updated resume. Even Pine Valley quietly removed her from their staff page, stating her contract had been terminated during the vetting process. She didn't speak again publicly. No rebuttals. No appeals. Just silence. It was unclear whether she was still in the state, whether she was watching, reading, regretting. But the truth was no longer hers to distort. It belonged to Amira now. The Johnson family declined interviews. They didn't want headlines anymore. Amira returned to her routine, tutoring younger students, writing essays, attending therapy, building something that resembled a life again. She volunteered with the Rising Voices Fund, sat in on virtual panels. She laughed more, slept better, smiled, occasionally, without it looking like armor. But there was one thing she hadn't done. One place she hadn't returned. Until she did. The building looked the same. Halcyon Prep hadn't changed its logo or its colors, or the way the sunlight spilled across the front walkway. But the energy was different. The students held eye contact now. The staff watched their tone. The walls had been repainted. There were new posters in the hallway, about inclusion, diversity, empathy. And yet, the ghost was still there. Amira entered through the side doors on a Saturday afternoon. She had scheduled the visit quietly. No announcement, no camera. She had only one stop to make. Her old locker. It still had the faint scratch from where someone had once carved the word monkey. The paint had been buffed, but the metal still held memory. She opened it. Empty, quiet. A space that had once humiliated her, now waited for her on her own terms. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. She placed it gently on the top shelf of the locker, then closed the door, locked it, and walked away. What Amira left behind was just 6 words, written in her now familiar looping script. The note read, "For the next girl, you belong here." The headlines faded, before the nightmares did. In the public eye, Amira had triumphed. A courtroom win, a scholarship, a national speech, and a movement in her name. The story was wrapped up clean in the media. Young black girl overcomes injustice, inspires millions, justice prevails. But off camera, healing was far messier. There were nights she still woke up gasping, heart thudding like it was back in that classroom, wrists burning from the phantom pinch of zip ties. Her therapist called it complex trauma. Her mind was still learning that she was safe. That being brilliant didn't mean being punished. That speaking up didn't mean being erased. that surviving didn't always feel like surviving. The sessions helped. So did the silence. For a while, Amira retreated, deleted most apps, muted notifications, turned down interviews. She began journaling again, not for the world but for herself. Her words weren't polished or poetic. They were scribbled, angry, unfinished, honest. One entry simply read, "They almost made me believe I was the problem." Another, "I keep flinching when people say my name. Like it's not mine anymore." She painted too. At first, just abstract shapes. Black, gold, gray. But soon, forms emerged. A faceless girl in a classroom. A row of desks, stretching endlessly, a mouth stitched shut with thread. A cracked mirror with her reflection looking back, unharmed. Art gave her a language when speech still felt too public. Her father gave her space. Marcus Johnson, the man who had once walked into Halcyon, like a war zone, now made a point of being still. He cooked dinner, checked in gently, fixed the sink, swept the porch. He didn't ask too much. He just made sure she knew he was there. "You okay?" he'd say from across the kitchen. "Getting there," she'd say back. Sometimes that was enough. Other times he'd catch her staring out the window, jaw clenched, and know it wasn't over. Not really. Not yet. Community began to form around her, not out of pity, but solidarity. Other students who'd once been quiet reached out. Teachers in other cities messaged to say, "You helped me see my students differently." Artists offered to collaborate. College students quoted her speech in essays. At first, it overwhelmed her. But slowly, it began to anchor her. Her story had cracked something open, and now voices were pouring through. She wasn't the first. She wouldn't be the last. But she had made it a little harder for schools to pretend they didn't know. But still, there were hard days. Sometimes she'd hear footsteps behind her and freeze. Sometimes she'd reread an old email from Miss Kendall and feel her throat tighten. Sometimes she'd walk past a group of laughing white girls, and for no reason at all, feel like they were laughing at her. PTSD didn't announce itself with fanfare. It crept in during moments that should have been safe. She spoke less now, but listened more. Once, in a grocery store, a woman stopped her and said, "You're the girl, right? From the school?" Amira nodded. The woman reached into her purse and handed her a folded piece of paper. Inside was a hand-drawn heart, and the words, "You helped my daughter not feel crazy." Amira didn't cry. She just held the note like it was something fragile and sacred. At night, she painted in the garage with the door open. One canvas, unfinished, showed a tree with deep roots and no leaves. She kept returning to it, unsure what it meant.
Maybe it was about growth.
Maybe it was about grief. Maybe both. Then one day, it happened. A new school year began at Halcyon Prep. The administration had changed. Several teachers had been replaced. A new diversity officer had been hired. There were new banners in the hallway about equity and inclusion. But some things stayed the same. The lockers were still cold steel, lined in rigid rows. One of them on the third floor, near the east stairwell, stood quietly. Amira's old locker, untouched since the day she slipped a note into it and walked away. On the third day of the new term, a new student arrived. She was black. Her name was Layla, 15 years old. Transfer from a public magnet school in another state. She didn't know the full story yet, just bits and pieces from whispers and Google results. But she'd seen the TikToks, heard the rumors. "You're in room 2C, a senior told her. That was her room, you know? Layla just nodded. She wasn't sure what to do with that. She found her locker late that afternoon. It stuck a little when she opened it. Inside, empty space, faint scent of lavender, a cool metallic echo, and something resting on the top shelf. Folded paper. She picked it up slowly, carefully, unfolded it. Read the handwriting. 6 words, for the next girl. "You belong here." She stared at it for a long time, then smiled. Not big, just enough. Later that day, Layla walked into AP English and took the seat near the window. As class began, the new teacher, a black woman named Miss Ellis, wrote in looping cursive on the board, "Voice is power." Then she turned to the class and said, "Let's start by telling the stories they tried to silence." And Layla, for the first time that day, raised her hand. The hallway was quieter than usual when Layla stepped in the next morning. It was early, too early for most students. The janitor's cart was still parked at the end of the corridor. A soft hum came from the vents above. She held her books to her chest, feet hesitating in front of her locker. The note was still there, unmoved, untouched. She had read it 4 times already the night before, memorized the loops of each letter, Googled the name at the bottom. Amira Johnson. The more she read, the heavier it became. Not a burden, but a weight of history. It was more than a message. It was a hand reached out across time. She tucked it into the back pocket of her notebook and walked to class. That day, in AP English, Miss Ellis stood at the board and wrote in bold looping cursive, "Voice is memory." Then she turned to the class. "Today we're starting a new unit," she said. "It's not in your textbook. It's something real." She passed out photocopies, faded articles, clippings, and blog posts. A YouTube transcript. At the top of the first page, "The girl who refused to be erased. The Amira Johnson story." Layla blinked. The room held a pause, and then Miss Ellis said softly, "Who here knows why this story matters?" From that day on, Amira wasn't just history. She was curriculum. Her speech played on the projector during assemblies. Her legal case became a case study in civics. Her scholarship fund was highlighted during Black History Month. And her artwork donated anonymously hung framed in the main hallway. Each new year, students heard her story not as a tragedy, but as a warning and a call to speak, to question, to hold the line, even when their voices shook. Meanwhile, miles away and worlds ahead, Amira sat in her first-year law class, notebook open, pen tapping against the edge of her desk. She had been accepted to Howard Law on full scholarship, one of the youngest in her cohort. She didn't say much in class, but when she did, the room went still. Her professors learned quickly. Amira didn't speak, unless the words mattered. And when they came, they were surgical, precise, wounded,
Wise.
She had seen what systems could do. Now she was learning how to unbuild them. One afternoon, after a guest lecture on educational equity law, the professor paused at her desk. "I've been following your work since the trial," he said. "You have something rare. A voice that cuts through." Amira didn't smile. She just nodded. "Thank you," she said. But it cost more than it should have. In the evenings, she volunteered at a local youth center, mostly tutoring, sometimes just listening. She didn't talk about her past much, but occasionally, a student would mention that girl from Georgia without knowing they were sitting across from her. And Amira would listen, and correct them gently, if needed. No, she didn't lash out. She stood up. No, it wasn't just one bad teacher. It was a whole system. Sometimes she'd say nothing at all. Just listen as they processed. Because she knew. Sometimes silence isn't erasure. Sometimes silence is space for someone else to speak. Back in Georgia, Halcyon Prep looked different. The student body was more diverse. The administration now included 2 Black women, 1 Latino counselor, and a district-appointed equity officer. Discipline policies had been rewritten. Bias training was mandatory. Students now had access to anonymous reporting tools. But most of all, the culture had changed. Because Amira had forced it to see itself. And in doing so, forced it to grow. The note in the locker had been laminated now. Not officially, just by the girls who came after. One taped it back inside after Layla passed it on. Another added her own name beneath it. Then another. Soon, it wasn't just Amira's handwriting. It was a list. A chain of names, all written in different scripts, ink colors, and slants. Each one a voice. Each one a vow. You belong here. Years later, during a school board meeting, the principal brought out a binder filled with letters from students who had once been silent. He read one aloud. "Before Amira, I thought being invisible was the safest way to survive. Now I know that silence was part of the harm. I speak because she did." In a coffee shop near her campus, Amira opened her inbox one morning and found an email titled, "You changed my life." It was from Layla. They had never met in person. But Layla had tracked her down after graduating and starting college herself. The message read, "You didn't know me, but you saved me." That note in the locker. It was the first time I believed I deserved to be there. You didn't just fight for yourself. You left the door open for the rest of us. Amira reread it twice, then wrote back only one sentence. "I was never alone. I just went first." Her final year of law school, Amira delivered the commencement address. She didn't speak about her case. She didn't mention Miss Kendall. She didn't revisit the trauma. She spoke about systems and voices, about how every movement starts, not with a shout, but with a whisper someone decided to stop ignoring. And she ended with a line that had once lived in a locker and now lived in dozens of hearts. They tried to erase me, but they only made me unforgettable. If you've ever been silenced for simply existing, you know how heavy that silence feels. No one should have to fight to be seen. Type yes if every student deserves to belong. Subscribe if this story broke your heart and opened your eyes.